And you may be seated, and as you're seated, kids, you can come on up, and the rest of you join me in singing our kids' song. This is where children belong. Welcome as part of the worshiping throng. Water God's word, bread and cup, prayer and song. This is where children belong. Good morning, friends. Good morning, good morning. Okay, so some of my older friends. Have you ever followed a recipe, like to make cookies, or you followed a recipe? You've done that. I'll ask my kids, am I a good cook? No. Well, they're honest because I am I am terrible, aren't I? I don't like cooking. There's nothing about it I enjoy. I mean, they keep wanting to eat. Every day they keep wanting food, and I have to keep making food. And Daddy, my husband, is a much better cook than I am, right? Yes, so we leave that to Dad. I am awful at it. But I do know how to follow a recipe, don't I? I know how to follow a recipe. I'm not one of those, I bet there are some of you out there that you can just kind of open your cupboard and just be like, oh, I have this and this. I'm going to throw some stuff together. Who out there is that person? Oh, I'm not that person. But I can follow a recipe. And recipes are kind of interesting because, let's take cookies, for instance. You put a bunch of stuff in there, and some of it's stuff you wouldn't eat by itself. I wouldn't eat just a spoonful of baking soda. No, and I wouldn't just eat a cup of flour. Blech. I wouldn't do that. But when we put raw eggs, I would not do that. But when you put it all together in that recipe, it makes the most delicious cookie, doesn't it? Oh, it's so good. Well, I'm talking about recipes because in today's scripture story that we're going to hear upstairs and they're going to hear down here, Jesus describes himself as the bread of life. That's kind of a weird way to describe yourself. Could you imagine saying I'm Avery, I'm the cookie of Muskegon, or whatever you are? That's a weird way to say something, describe yourself. I'm the bread of life. But I think what he's trying to describe is, he's saying, if you follow my ways, if you follow the ways of God, the ways that I live will kind of nourish or feed your soul. Because when we follow the ways of God, we can find healing and forgiveness and joy and unconditional love. And when we follow his ways, we live this life that is so full. It's it feeds us like the bread of life, like bread feeds our bodies. He's saying, I can feed you too. And so he's saying this, and then there's kind of a recipe that follows. To live that way of life, he kind of gives us a recipe. He says, hey, if you spend time talking to me in prayer, if you spend time with other people that believe in me, when we come here on Sundays, if you spend time in worship, if you spend time doing these things, that's the recipe. Then pouring out your life will be this life of love and forgiveness and healing. That's the recipe. The recipe is spending time with one another, and it's in prayer, and it's in worship, and it's in learning the stories of Jesus and trying to follow those stories. That's the recipe. So it's kind of like making those cookies. When we put all the ingredients together, we get the most delicious thing at the end. We get that really lovely cookie, or we get that bread of life. We get that life that Jesus wants us to live, that life that's full and so joyful. And so we're going to talk about that story upstairs while they continue working down here with that story. You guys ready? Let's go.